Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much. Welcome to The Beat. I am Ari Melber, and this high-stakes clash over Biden's spending agenda continues tonight. Washington adjusting to a world where House liberals hold the line and actually flex their power. As a political matter, that means the president must deal with his left flank, which is why, as we're coming on the air, we know that Biden is meeting with House progressives, who made Speaker Pelosi delay that vote on the Biden infrastructure bill. But let's be clear and objective. That political leverage, however real, does not ensure any automatic success. It just ensures a seat at the table. Biden is now at that table, and he's telling his party they will still have to move towards at least Joe Manchin a little bit. They will have to cut down from the over $3 trillion in proposed spending on the safety net, which is a priority for progressives. One of their leaders offering a peek into this ongoing conversation and what it will take to fund their priorities.
We're not thinking about the number. And the president said this to us, too. He said, don't start with the number. Start with what you're for, and that's what he's asked them for. And then let's come to the number from there. So that's how we're thinking about it.
So if we're not looking at numbers, what about 1.5, like what Senator
Well,
Manchin
that's not
wants?
going to happen.
But
so it's going to be somewhere.
Why won't it add up to that
Because
number?
that's too small to get our priorities in. So it's going to be somewhere, between 1.5 and 3.5.
Democratic Senate Leader Schumer insists both bills will pass by Halloween. And he's united with more liberal members like Bernie Sanders here, at least on one thing, pushing back on Senators Manchin and Sinema, who seem oddly fixated on trying to separate this into two votes, while claiming that they're fine with ultimately voting on both packages. Now, Biden and many progressives have basically implied that keeping the bills together makes it more likely they will get up or down votes. We are talking about a Senate where plenty of important things never get a vote. The idea being that separating them would leave more room for waffling in the Senate.
Well, I think Senator Sinema is wrong. Both of these bills are going forward in tandem. We've got to pass them both.
Now, agree or disagree, I can tell you that Bernie Sanders seems to honestly be saying where he stands. Joe Manchin spent months publicly claiming he had not decided on the numbers while secretly deciding on the numbers. He decided in his own mind on $1.5 trillion as his ceiling and secretly told everyone in the Senate about it, or at least Chuck Schumer and a few other people, but not the public. Meanwhile, Sinema, who was not a household name as recently as last month, has, and this is not my opinion, it's just what we saw this weekend, she basically, through her posture here, has turned herself into something of an SNL punchline for vagueness and trolling.
On one side, we have the moderate Democrats, Kirsten Sinema from Arizona.
What do I want from this bill? I'll never tell, because I didn't come to Congress to make friends. And so far, mission accomplished.
That's one view of it from SNL. I'm joined by Katrina Vanden Heuvel, publisher of The Nation and my former boss. And we're joined by Professor Jason Johnson, an MSNBC contributor. Jason, tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
Well, I think people in D.C. are surprised that Biden gets along better with his friends on the progressive side. And the fact that he seems to have thrown in with the progressives in the House who said, look, we're not voting for this infrastructure bill, which you moderates like, unless both these things are linked together. It's actually good strategy. And it's because Joe Biden, just like Bernie Sanders and the rest of these long-term senators and negotiators, understand you can't trust Kirsten Sinema. You can't trust Joe Manchin. And if they get what they want, if they get the road infrastructure bill done now, there is no guarantee that they won't waffle and prevaricate and do everything else they can to not vote for the larger soft infrastructure bill. So I actually think Joe Biden's making a very smart decision right now. This is the future of the party, and it is his entire agenda. There's no reason to split it up this early.
Katrina?
The progressives are the pragmatists, and they're supporting Biden's agenda. The conservatives, the conservative Democrats, are obstructing. And in fact, this isn't really the progressive agenda. They wanted a bolder Green New Deal and Medicare for all. Right. But polls, it's very popular, Ari. And I think that is often misunderstood. I mean, I think you have a fight here between the progressives, pragmatists. I mean, Pramila Jayapal is a whip-smart progressive, maybe the next speaker. And I think she understands that you have to move away, refocus from that top line, which she was doing on the show the other day, and really talk about what's in this bill. It's going to help Democrats win in 2022 if you can improve the concrete conditions of people's lives. And I think that's what President Biden is flying to Michigan tomorrow to talk about. And I think that's critical at this stage. Get off that number. Stop with tax and spend. This is about investing in a country that needs investment urgently, desperately. And I think the progressives have a balance of power here.
Yeah, and I also want to cover the squabble over paying America's debts. Congress voting 3 separate times, by the way, to handle this in the Trump era. Now Republicans threatening to default on the debt as a political move, outraging Biden today.
Republicans in Congress, what they're doing today is so reckless and dangerous. Quite frankly, it's hypocritical, dangerous and disgraceful. Their obstruction and irresponsibility knows absolutely no bounds.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, this is a trick that Republicans have been pulling for years now. We're running up on the debt ceiling. You guys have to pass it. We don't want to pass it. We want this bill. We want that passed. I think it's important for America to understand, look, this is dangerous. It's irresponsible. We don't want to default on our debts. But this is also, it is purely ideological at this point. You know, this same Congress that's, you know, these same Republicans that are concerned right now about what we're going to do with our debt and our debt ceiling, whatever, we just passed an extra $23 billion increase in our defense budget, even though we're leaving Afghanistan. We're about to spend $720 million, $720 billion, something like that, over the next several dozen years for our defense budget alone. No one's arguing about that. No one's arguing that we can cut money out of all the expenses and all the multiple wars and places we're supporting abroad. So let's be clear. The idea that we have to play these brinkmanship games when it comes to our debt is purely an ideological game on the part of Republicans and some Democrats, because we never seem to have these fights and concerns about other ways that we spend money like drunken sailors on a weekend.
It's rank hypocrisy. It's rank hypocrisy. It's trying to say that the Democrats are responsible for the debt, when in fact the Democrats are responsible for keeping this secure from this partisan hackery. But I will say there are people who protested that $25 billion thrown at the defense budget, the nation for one, and I fear it's bipartisan. When people say there's no money, there's no revenue, I mean, let's look at what's invested in this country. I continue to think we need to think hard about what security means, and that's what this reconciliation bill is about. It's about investing in the future of this country, and it's fair share politics. It's not. We have the resources. It's just we need to invest them more wisely.
Yeah, and everything we've just said is about sort of the framework as it is, and there's a reality in Washington. There's also all the stuff that can be taken for granted but shouldn't. It's something, by the way, we mentioned the nation. I mean, the nation has shined a light on a lot of the things that are taken for granted but may be wrong with the financial system and the elites and the global 1%. So our panel stays, but I want to shift into what is a related but second report here. Biden's plan would make billionaires, he says, pay more of their fair share. And look at this context tonight. Also part of our top story, an explosive investigation that shines a light on these issues. Shout out to the Washington Post, along with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists that worked with them on this, because if you haven't heard about this yet, it is big. They have this report on how elites around the world are hiding their wealth, cheating the system, which means at a minimum, you pay more. They use a lot of what the Post calls Byzantine tactics, sheltering assets from accountability, tax havens abroad, financial trusts that are designed essentially to deceive governments, including the United States, and real estate to evade the taxes they would otherwise owe, that they would owe if they just told the truth. 206 U.S.-based trusts, 41 countries involved, 30 of the trusts holding assets that connect people or companies that have already been accused, at least allegedly, of facing fraud, bribery, or human rights abuses as part of how they do business. Now, we've discussed super wealthy avoiding taxes before, major corporations that pay nothing. This, again, goes to how you're going to fund the spending in the potential Biden packages here. The 1% in America, they've evaded, if you count it up, $163 billion in taxes annually. Think about the trillions that adds up to. Bezos, Buffett, Musk pay an effective tax rate. I'm sorry, even if you're a cynic, this is galling. Look at the report of under 4%, the true tax rate. The panel returns, as I mentioned. Katrina, you and your magazine have spotlighted this in many ways. I say shout out to the reporters who did this, because you may have thought it was bad, but boy, is it bad right now. How does that play in to these equity discussions in Washington?
plays in a big, big way. This is about looting countries' revenues. This is about leaving people without hospitals, without adequate education. It's a very direct link. And I think we need to pay attention. You know, the choices we make are not inevitable. There is a fair share economy, shared prosperity. And in this pandemic, the top 1% has made out something like $55 billion. There is a one-time pandemic tax that has been used before in this country's history in different times of crisis. And it would still allow billionaires to go off in rockets. So I think we need to look hard at this Pandora's Papers. It's a follow-on to the Panama Papers, but it's Panama Papers on steroids because it's not only more rigorous, but it comes at this time, Ari, of COVID, of when people say we don't have revenues. What do you mean we don't have revenues? Look at this report. There's 11 trillion in wealth abroad, according to the Organization of European OECD. So I think this is critical to understand there are choices, and it's not vengeance. It's keeping revenue for people and fair share.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, there is a broader tradition, and you see it in certain countries' politics, and maybe in America back in the FDR era, of saying, "Oh, go get them. They should pay even more." What he welcomed FDR as the anger of Wall Street.
Eisenhower. Eisenhower.
Go ahead.
Forget FDR. There was a marginal tax rate. It sounds crazy to people, but like 90% marginal tax rate. You'd be thrown out of Washington. We're going from 37 to 39. The main bottom line is that people who work should be taxed at the same rate as people who come off of capital gains, who have tax havens. That is the bottom line. But Warren Buffett's secretary shouldn't pay less in taxes than Warren Buffett.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to that point, Jason, as Katrina reminds us, FDR, Eisenhower, those rates, we're nowhere near that kind of militance, if you want to call it that. We're just talking about literally whether you ask the average American, including independents, conservatives, and many Republicans, if you just started from scratch, if you remove the Fox News filter and all the other gunk, and you just said, should you pay your full tax rate and should the billionaires pay theirs? Or should you pay your full tax rate and the billionaires pay 4%, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, look, you can criticize wealthy people how they spend their money, but we're talking about what these reports have shown. These folks aren't just hiding out from paying their taxes. They ain't just window shoppers, right? They're owning the whole store. They're owning the whole neighborhood. And they're using that wealth and using that political influence to change the lives of everyday people in ways that we can't control. And I have to mention this, Ari. He's not in this particular report, but I think it's an interesting note. Today, with these new reports we have about Facebook, there's, a report that maybe, Mark Zuckerberg may have lost like $7 billion or something in net worth in the last couple hours. The guy is worth $122 billion. Okay, what he may or may not have lost today could pay for every single person in this country to go to college for like 5 years in a good school. So when we have people who have that much wealth in this country and abroad, who are not paying remotely the level of taxes of somebody working at a Carl's Jr. down the street, that is a system that is not sustainable. And that is a system where it is hard for us to sit here and listen to Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin say, I don't want to give too many tax breaks and tax credits to people who don't deserve it, when you have folks who can lose $7 billion, spend $4 billion for their mistresses to have homes, and not pay taxes while Americans are out there struggling.
And Jason, was the window shopping a 50-cent reference?
Yes, it was.
I thought it might be. Katrina, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Jason said something important. It's about political power, too. It's who buys the political systems in this world. Yeah. And it's destabilizing the inequality we confront. There's a lot of talk about authoritarianism. This is a feeding ground. So again, you mentioned militants, Ari. I really want to say it's not about that, because I think it's about a fair share. People deserve a shake, an opportunity. And I think we're witnessing the lack of social mobility, the festering inequality. Right. Thomas Piketty, the economist, once said that you might unwind the inequality through a world war, God help us, or pandemic. That's not happened here. What's happened is the pandemic has almost calcified and deepened the inequality. So we need to think hard through fair taxes, or don't even use taxes, because part of the problem, I think, is the government has become mistrusted in ways. People don't trust that taxes will come back to them in concrete ways, which is part of what we need to prove with this reconciliation bill, that people will see concrete childcare, healthcare. All of these possibilities don't just come out of the sky.
Right. Yeah, I think it all makes sense, especially when you guys lay it out, and that's why we wanted to get to the missing piece of the pie. It's missing because people, according to that report, are hiding or in some cases legally defrauding governments,
yes,
including, if you're watching in America, your government, the U.S. government, which means you, when you talk about the fair share. Katrina and Jason kicking us off, thanks to both of you.